tech's always been part of my life, I guess, since an early day. My dad was in technology from very early start. And that led me to starting my first company when I was at school, when I was 14. And that was basically hardware, building computers and selling them to schools. It's a very simple trade. And I guess being an entrepreneur, you get bored pretty quickly. So went on to find the next thing. So I was quite lucky to actually sell that business in my 20s and then moved into trading, which was always, I guess, on my mind since watching Trading Places when I was like 6. So if you've ever seen that film with Eddie Murphy, it's
a great one.
Pretty cool watch.
Classic.
So my background then really just formed into financial technology and high-frequency trading, which, if any of you have read Flash Boys, that was kind of our game, which was all about latency arbitrage, which was running messages between one place and another as quickly as we could to try and take advantage of price discrepancy. So we started that in the really early days, like 2003, 2004, which were what we call the good old days. That doesn't really exist anymore, unfortunately. And it was really a technology play more than a finance play, actually, I guess. It was probably 95% tech and 5% finance. And actually, generally, it was probably one of the most enjoyable times of what I've done over the last few years. Working in data centers, trying to find the quickest fiber route between A and B, microwaves, all that kind of thing, it was pretty cool.
Nice. And I know you've got, and I think the audience might appreciate hearing the lengths that people and high-frequency, low-latency traders have to go to get ahead, basically, of the times.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of an arms race, really.
Yep.
And it was who had the quickest technology and servers closest to the exchanges. The shortest fiber routes, which literally a meter of fiber does make a difference.
Yeah.
And that's what we spent most of our time doing, was fiber blueprints and looking how we could cut down our execution time.
Even mapping the office to make sure that you were...
Yeah, we remember paying off a few security guards in some data centers to find out where the exchanges' racks were so that we could be slightly closer to them. But
nice.
We won't go into that now.
And you've been an investor in kind of household tech since the early days, really, of Facebook, Revolut, and various others.
Yeah, so our main market maker was called Canetta, and then latterly Xenfin, which that threw off a lot of spare capital, which I built my own family office from. We were lucky to be early stage investor in Facebook, so we were around Mark and Sean Parker in the early days, which was a very interesting time.
I can imagine.
And yeah, the likes of Deliveroo and Revolut, etc. And actually, what 3 words, which is sat at the back.
Yeah. So what is it around kind of those companies and those early tech startups that really grabbed your eye to begin with?
I think it was always like the consumer focus and scale. And that's obviously what's interesting from our point, is like if you can extract, actually when Facebook started, it was never a revenue model.
No.
They were all about how do we get as many people using this platform as quickly as possible. And that's obviously what they did in the early days, and then it became a data model. I can't say I agree with what they're doing today, and probably over the last 10 years or so, but that is what it is. We're no longer an investor, so just to clarify that.
Make that clear.
But that was always our focus, was on things that actually scale and help do things better for people. And I think that's one of...
it's one of the core drivers, isn't it?
Yeah, for me, it's like I hate latency. And that's in like everyday life. I get infuriated by the simple things, like just paying.
It does. I can vouch for that.
Why does the machine take 30 seconds to take my payment? It's really annoying.
Yeah.
Time's precious and all that. So.
And I think it's worth kind of stating, I think, how successful Xenfin has been over the last, it's been around for many years now, but 9 billion a day from tier 1 banks going through Xenfin, which I don't think many others can say from their own company that they set up.
It was 21 billion at the top.
21 billion? Well, I'm sorry, I've got my facts wrong. But I mean, incredibly impressive. So
thank you. Moving
into kind of the FX world and into this, kind of laying the scene for what we're about to announce afterwards, can you kind of walk us through kind of the incumbent FX world, the pitfalls, and maybe kind of the background of what people don't really see and the back end of every purchase you make, and what really kind of is the structure of the global economy?
I think that some of the biggest problems that consumers don't always see is, actually in the UK, the payment system is now quite efficient. So faster payments, I can send you £1 million. It can be in your account in about 5 seconds.
That'd be really nice. Can we do that now? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. But what the consumer doesn't always understand is everything that goes on in the back end of actually making that transaction happen. And I guess as well, one of my frustrations is I kind of akin it to the space race.
Yep.
Like in the 60s, we could put somebody on the moon. And since the 60s, not much has changed to like today, really, in that space of time, when you think what we were doing in the 60s. And it's kind of the same actually on payments and just general transacting globally. People kind of forget that foreign exchange underpins almost everything that we do.
Yep.
You know, like, I don't know, just saying, getting that Tesla here as an example, it's come from China, I assume. Someone's had to pay for it locally. It's got components that have had to be paid locally in local currency. It's come here, it's had import tax payment, etc. And people don't always understand that FX actually touches everybody.
Yep.
You probably don't care, but it does. And the frustration, I think, certainly from my perspective, is having worked in FX for 15 years, is how inefficient it is.
Archaic to an extent, really, isn't it?
But on a global scale. And actually now, a lot of local systems are getting pretty efficient. So the UK system is actually pretty efficient for sending, say, now up to 1 million. It used to be 10,000, then it was 100,000, now it's 1 million. And that happens at like, click of a finger now.
Yeah.
But it's taken a long time to get towards that. But if I want to try and send that $1 million to Australia, that's a completely different paradigm I've got to deal with.
Yeah.
And you've got two problems there. One is, people might not know this, but it's called Correspondent Banking, which is basically the bank that sits behind your bank to then settle that trade locally in the country where it's going. So if I've got to send Aussie dollars to Australia, I've got to first do a conversion.
Yep.
So I've got to convert it from sterling into Aussie dollars. That then goes into the Aussie dollar account of my bank somewhere else.
Yep.
Might be in Australia, it could be in the US, could be anywhere. And then it's got to be settled from that bank locally onshore. And if I try and do that today to Australia, it won't get there until Tuesday.
Yeah, it's madness.
I can't send it on a Saturday. And I can't actually put that trade in now until Monday morning. If I get it in super early, that's before 9 a.m., it might get there on Tuesday, probably not until Wednesday, which I just find crazy.
Yep.
And the problem with that is it does also impact day-to-day business because corporates, need to move money globally on a 24-hour basis, but the systems don't support it. So whilst the local systems may be pretty efficient, as soon as I try and move that offshore, I've got a massive problem. And there are lots of ways that, there are companies that are trying to make that better, but unfortunately, it still relies on correspondent banking, and that's not going to change for quite a while. Although we'll talk about that in half an hour.
Yeah,
so.
we will. Cool.
Sorry, I've waffled for a bit then.
No, you didn't at all. So, I mean, how does the FX market kind of currently compare to other markets in the world? I don't think many people may understand kind of the variance, I would say, of markets.
Well, I guess actually FX is, I don't want to say efficient, but it is one of the more efficient of, let's say, a commodity, for want of a better word. So, like, I can transact sterling today, and I can have it in your account on Monday. But then when we start to look at things like equities or, standard commodities, gold, or anything physical, the settlement of that can be days.
Yep.
And in some cases, weeks, depending on the jurisdiction that you're trading with. And that's not always a settlement problem that's causing that. It may actually be more of a regulatory problem, and that's what people also forget, is there's lots of little other things that come into the ultimate thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So when something is slow, it might not be because what you're trying to do is slow, it's because of a knock-on effect to something else that's slow.
What would you say the largest kind of pitfall? I know that you think kind of the FX markets of today are relatively efficient, but what do you say the largest kind of pitfall?
The biggest problem is settlement. So, and that's actually, it's really starting to impact businesses today on the more transactional side, because there's this whole new regulation that's come in with MiFID, it's called MiFID, Market in Financial Information, in derivatives, which now you've got to put up your own balance sheet to take into account settlement risk. So if I trade something today, let's say Aussie dollars, actually I can't trade today, it's Saturday. If I trade on Monday,
that's the point, I think.
That's the point. You should be able to trade it today, and I should be able to pay someone today. But if I trade it on Monday morning, I can't get it to them until Wednesday. So I've got to allocate part of my balance sheet for those 2 days until it's actually been received by the other end. This is if I'm a regulated business. And if you think about the amount of, like as Xenfin, $9 billion a day.
21.
It's not anymore. It was 21, 9 now. I've essentially got to put up percentage of my balance sheet to take into account the settlement risk of that.
Yeah.
Where I could actually settle it instantly if there was a better system to do it, which there might well be soon.
And do you think kind of the FX sector, are going to face more problems moving forward in the upcoming years with kind of the Wild West that we're currently living in? Or do you feel that, obviously in half an hour, hopefully we'll be showing a little bit of news, which might be a solution to this, but if that didn't exist?
I think there is a kind of global effort to try and make it better because people are aware that the settlement risk and time delay risk has a real impact on global commerce. And it is getting better.
Yeah.
You know, there are several iterations that have made it better over, you know, the past previous years. But then, you know, it also comes into just really simple. I'll give you an example. We sent $200,000 to one of our business partners in Bahamas on the, I still remember this because I've been still dealing with it. On the 7th of June, we sent it from our sterling account here in the UK, we sent it to Bahamas in dollars. So we did an instant sterling to dollar conversion, not a T2, we did it as what's called a T0, which is the same day. And sent it to what we thought was the account in Bahamas. Their bank, for whatever reason, rejected it 2 days later. We're still waiting for that to come back to our bank account.
Yeah, it's mad.
They say they've sent it. We haven't received it. No one can tell us where it is. Because there is no system to enable that in today, which is also crazy.
That's mad.
So that's also where things like blockchain can really help with not so much the actual problem. We know what the problem is. We haven't received it. They've sent it. But actually just the information flow that comes out of those systems to help assist businesses. I've spent hours of my days trying to solve this.
Yeah, a public immutable ledger would be incredibly helpful.
Exactly.
And actually that leads us on very nicely into, obviously, Duncan, you are a Nano supporter and have been, and have delved into kind of the crypto world. I think you were you were incredibly early back in 2013, kind of, you know, before Nano's time, where you created a very interesting and I think incredibly clever business, which was mining rigs and Bitcoin. Do you mind running us through how you actually made those relatively sustainable? And I know the Nano community and ourselves are very anti-mining and the energy consumption therein. However, back in 2013, I found this incredibly fascinating. I think the way that you created this.
I don't think it's that fascinating, but
Let the audience decide.
Okay. Well, actually, mining is pretty simple. And yeah, sorry for the community on that. We do have a big mining operation. However, it does use renewable power, so you can dig me for that later if you want. But
so I mean, how is it renewable?
It's all hydro. So every bit of power that our company uses is hydro. And actually, in the UK, we have a power plant that we own that takes used car tires. And we thermally decouple the tyres in a vacuum at about 600 degrees, get a gas off the back end of it, and we convert that gas into power. So actually that is what powers our mining up in Grimsby. So it's got a pretty negative CO2 impact, that one.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
We're actually building more of those plants. And our plan is to build decentralized data centers around those to be used specifically for blockchain to try and improve the kind of energy consumption in that space.
And I think you've always, one of your latest ventures in Norway, using the external resourcing of being incredibly cold and icy and snowy to cool down your mining rigs.
Yeah, so we started to switch earlier this year into immersion cooling, which is where we stick the miners in a dielectric fluid. And we actually, the site that we're currently just building, or about to build, uses the cold water from the fjord to help cool the dielectric fluid. It's just basically two heat exchangers. It's actually very simple.
Nice, but clever, efficient.
It helps people stop knocking us on the Bitcoin mining thing. So, yeah.
And I know that you have, you're running, a couple of Nano nodes and have been playing around with a bit of an interesting setup.
Yeah, I guess it's more of like our hobby thing, or my hobby thing. So we've got a node up in Grimsby, which runs on Starlink. It's actually powering. The internet comes from Starlink for that node. And the power essentially is coming from solar and wind. So it is technically decentralized. We could place it anywhere where there's Starlink.
Nice. And I mean, I think we're all hoping, the Nano community and ourselves, to have, a greater link with Starlink and Nano being the payment. That would be the dream, obviously, that I think we all hope. So, Duncan, what really was it about Nano that captured your eye? And I know that we've known each other for quite a few years now.
Well, I think I still remember when you came into the office. I think it was 2016,
Yep.
Maybe. And at the time, we were just building Neo, which was technically our bank. Well, not technically, it is our bank, to try and do banking better. And Neo is Well, it's a great product, obviously, because it's ours. But
yeah.
It still comes up with the same problems every day. You've still got to rely on correspondent banking and other people. So whilst it's very good at one front, it still relies on a pretty shitty back end, unfortunately, and we can't break that at the minute, but it will break in a certain point in time. But that's how we initially met, was when you came and started to talk to us about Nano and what you were doing. And that kind of caught my eye, I guess, in two angles. One was, and I think Chris mentioned it earlier, it's just the fast and fearless that's just number one on my list.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of what Bitcoin should have been and isn't, and solves a lot of the problems with that. And I guess it's also why I believe in Nano massively on one side, is like micropayments are a big problem. And it's why no one wants to take less than £5 in a corner shop for whatever you want to buy
£10
there.
most
or
of the
£10,
time,
because the cost of that execution is too high.
Yep.
And ultimately, that was what I was thinking with my stupid head, was at some point this could probably power a lot of micropayments, and if you had a POS terminal that could take that, then actually that improves it for the consumer because they can pay whatever they want, and actually for the retailer they're saving themselves 2 or 3% on Visa and MasterCard fees, which I still find is entirely scandalous. But anyway,
it is scandalous, especially with small business. It's madness. I mean, I think we came into your office to pitch to you Nano SMS back in the day, where it was trying to receive Nano.
And it didn't work.
And it didn't work. The demo didn't work on the day, and Duncan did forgive us, and we were allowed to come back and continue talking. And here we are, nearly 5 years later.
But I think that that's the point, really, just to reiterate, is the kind of fast and fearless. And to be fair to you guys, you've done an incredible job so far to get to where you are. And I think sometimes a lot of that's forgotten in the community. I know there's a lot of bashing and what have you, and I get it quite occasionally. It's like, why aren't you doing stuff quicker? It's like, I've got a lot of other stuff on, so you know, this stuff doesn't get done overnight, and building businesses is not easy, I can tell you.
Live, financial networks,
And again, going back to the point, we need to rely on a lot of other things in the back end, and they don't move quickly, and they quite often involve a lot of regulation. And as we found here, we were wanting to build the ATMs. The regulation changed halfway through that project to the point we had to bin what we'd spent on it already, which is quite frustrating, but it is what it is.
And so there are, the UK is not allowing crypto ATMs moving forward, which is a real shame. And that is why that project with Duncan came to an end. However, there is a lot of potential and future elsewhere as well.
And I guess from that, it's like deeply frustrating as well. It's more because the regulators haven't got a bloody clue what's going on.
I saw the potential.
Because actually, we'd solved all of the problems that I thought existed in terms of ID and what have you, which is the main problem that actually they're concerned about, is AML and risk and KYC, etc. That had all been solved. So actually, if they understood what we were trying to do, I could probably argue that we were better than what else is out there.
Absolutely. And I think London being such a remittance hub as well, it could have really changed quite a few people's lives, which is a
and it goes back to what Wirex was saying as well. I find it entirely scandalous that someone's got to lose. When you remember, that's like lower end of earning potential. Losing 20% just to send money home is disgusting. Like, it really is. Could be any of those, depending on. So obviously, let's just take the kind of nano side in isolation. Obviously, we're building on one side of that a large on-ramp, off-ramp, and also small on-ramp and off-ramp, because I feel that's also one of the problems that exists. And certainly it's something I've heard from the community quite a lot, is that they struggle to get money in and out of Nano unless you're with Binance or Kraken, and even then you've got to fund in either sterling or euros or dollars. So that's one thing that we've been wanting to solve. But ultimately, yes, on the settlement side is, even if we're dealing in digital on one side, somewhere you've got to drop back to the old world. And that means something settling into a Nostro-Vostro somewhere. And that's the difficult bit that takes time to set up, especially when you're dealing with local payments. As an example, in Neo, we've got onshore banking relationships now, I think it's 15 countries. And that's taken us almost 6 years to do. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's also what people don't always understand, is what goes on in the back end doesn't happen overnight and takes a lot of time to do.
Obviously, with London and kind of obviously Brexit, or the banks moving out and into Germany and Europe, and they're kind of being left a bit of a hole in the banking, kind of in the city, really. We've got a lot of excitement, and a lot of the MPs and the government are now saying they want to create a blockchain hub here and make London really the home of blockchain. How do you feel about kind of the regulatory landscape when it comes to the incumbent and crypto world in London?
I think this goes back to the point of the regulator, which we've interfaced here with on quite a few different levels, and whilst they like to say they know what they're doing, they really don't when it comes to crypto, which is a big problem.
Yeah, it's a shame.
And the most frustrating thing is that most of the problems they think exist are actually solved, or there is technology that exists to solve them.
Yeah.
And whilst they say they want to create a digital hub here, actually that in person I think is going to be quite difficult.
I agree.
I know it's all great to have good news articles out there exactly, saying that we're going to be this hub of innovation.
Queen's Jubilee NFT, I think, which is still yet to be seen.
I was going to say, did it happen? No, exactly, because they haven't got a clue how to do it.
Nope.
And I think that's one of the big problems is actually there's a lot of really good people here in the UK.
Yep.
Very much at the forefront of whether it's payments, blockchain, crypto, whatever. And if the government and the regulator would be more embracing to actually build focus groups around that, I think that they would be able to move it forward quicker. But it doesn't seem that they're wanting to do that at any type of speed.
And that's what we're trying to wangle our way into at the moment.
Yeah, which when you compare it to places like Switzerland and Zug, where they've kind of created a ecosystem there around it, because they had a forward-thinking regulator that wanted to speak to local private companies that could assist them.
And it's action behind the words as well, I think, to make it, and it really embrace this technology. You can say all you want, but actually it needs action on the ground to make that happen.
Yeah, and I guess that touches a bit on things like CBDC and what have you, which I know everyone wants to ask about, but we'll probably deal with that later. But
yeah, we're going to get into that in a bit.
I've definitely got my own views on that. But.
Yeah, I think they're all shared, to be honest.
This is the other big problem we have to deal with, is that you remember here, commercial banking is, they're here to stop any innovation because they make so much money out of inefficient markets. So that's actually where a lot of the pushback comes from, because they don't want it to change. And that is one of the big problems here. They don't see that innovation could actually help them in terms of longer term new products. So yes, their revenue is going to go down in the interim, but actually you can build a lot more product off the back end of it, which would get them back to where they were. That's my personal view, but maybe wrong. Yeah, we do it. So yeah, my trading background was very much arbitrage, predominantly bonds and FX. Again, it's exactly the same arms race. So we started it in FX in 2003. By about 2009, it had got to the point where we were spending so much on technology, we couldn't compete with the other people that had deeper pockets. And it's kind of the same on the crypto side for me. Take it back maybe 2-3 years ago, there was a lot of edge. I call edge in the market as profit. And certainly when we looked at it as a trading house, more in depth over the last, I guess, 5-6 months, our edge has decreased significantly over the last 18 months. That's not to say there's not arbitrage there, but it's becoming much more difficult. And that's also because you've got a lot of the very high frequency companies that were traditionally traded in equities and FX or in commodities are all moved into the market because the market access has now become a lot easier for them. So previously, 4 or 5 years ago, getting a single custody account where I could trade on Binance and Coinbase and FTX at the same time and have all those cleared back to one place didn't exist. So you needed deep pockets to be able to fund each exchange and move assets around, and that's where the edge was created. But now I can trade on any one of those exchanges and have my trade clear back to my prime broker. The edge has come down significantly because the barrier to entry is a lot less.
And just a reminder that Nano is a very, very good arbitrage tool.
Yes. Gas. So, ultimately, that's always the problem that exists in arbitrage. So, arbitrage is quite a simple business. I'm buying one asset at X price and selling it at another price. The only thing that makes that more difficult is what it costs me to execute that trade, be that a settlement fee, a transaction fee on exchange, etc. So, with arbitrage as well, markets are not entirely inefficient. But the edge, which is the potential profit, is generally very, very low, as you'd expect. So, a 1 cent difference in a transaction cost makes a hell of a difference. When you're, I'll give you an example. On our market making business, for every $1 million of notional that we trade, we make about $3. So that's $1 million of exposure in the market. I make $3 out of it. So to settle that trade cost me $1.50 at the minute. So I'm only making $1.50 on that transaction. If I could cut that by $1.50, I'm instantly making, another 100% on my bottom line. So yeah, like there's two things really. The speed helps massively because it means I can move assets between A and B very, very quickly, and that's between maybe one prime broker and another. But actually, it's really the transaction fees that are the biggest upside because it impacts the bottom line the heaviest.